Hey, are you interested in learning how to use hooks to manage state in React? If so, you found the right video. I'm David Raffoff. Today I'm going to be going through an example of how you could use state with a form and just show what that would look like, how you can kind of clean things up, and even separate some concerns as you go through it. So this is going to cover a lot of ground. I'm going to try to move pretty quickly, but I will have the starting state and ending state both linked in the show notes if you want to check that out, or if you want to try to run through this yourself. But yeah, here we go. So here I've got just a simple little example up, and it's essentially a stripped down version of the kind of stock Bootstrap form example. So here we've got, just sign up. It's asking for an email address, and it's asking for, it has a field here for that. It's got some little tooltips down here. And then for now, I've just gone ahead and hard coded an error in here. And our submit button is disabled. And you'll notice it's pretty much just like a stock React app setup. So here we're just, we've got a component for app. That's what's getting used as the rendered to the root element here, and then it's just a container that pulls in the signup form. So I'll hop over to the signup form, and again, there's nothing too surprising here. This is just a really basic React functional component that's going to return the markup for this form. And at the moment, it's very dumb, doesn't do anything. I've gone ahead and disabled the submit button on it just so don't accidentally hit submit and lose this form. I had a little trouble with that earlier. But yeah, I want to go through tracking how you could track state, and that includes the value that somebody's entered into that field, as well as whether the form is submittable, whether they're trying to submit it, what kind of errors there are, what the error messages are for those errors. And as I said, I'm going to move pretty quickly, but I'm going to try to explain everything as I'm going along here. So we're off to a good start. We've got our main app in the index file. We've got a separate form, a separate component for our form over here. And the first thing we'll want to do is, instead of just having this be kind of freeform, actually track this as state. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to bring in some fields for now, and I'll show you what that looks like. Basically just going to make an object that can hold on to what our fields are and whatever information we want to track about those fields. So up here at the top, you can see we've got email as a field, and for now we're just tracking the value for that. And I'm just going to take that and set it to fields down here, lowercase fields. It'll make sense why I'm doing that in a bit. And then the last piece of this is we need to actually use the value of those fields. So down here, we can just do value equals, and then we can do fields dot email dot value. And you saw there were some warnings there as I was doing that, but here now if we were to enter something in here, we're going to get that value to show up over here on the right. And if we get rid of it, we're not going to get anything showing up on the right. So that's pretty straightforward. So at this point, we're holding on to some state. We're holding on to some values, I should say, and we're just referring to whatever the current value is for that field on our fields. And then the thing that probably jumps out is we're not actually really using React kind of the way it's meant to be used here. So we probably want to use hooks to do some of this. So our next step here is just going to be, instead of setting fields like this, we're going to switch it up, and we're actually going to use hooks. So here we will do constant fields set fields. And we'll set that to react.useState. So that's our useState hook. And we'll initialize that with fields from above. So now, instead of just setting it this way, we're going to get both the managed value for fields as well as a setter for fields. And then we can just double check that if we use an initial value on that, that's what's going to get used, and it is. So that's looking good. But one problem we'll have here is if we actually try to enter anything into here, it's not going to do anything. And that's because the value that's going to be used here is determined by this value down here. And that doesn't have any way to change at the moment. So we're trying to enter some things, and React is saying, nope, I know what the value is of that, and I'm going to keep it at that value. So what we need to do is introduce a onChange handler. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead. This is going to give us some errors for a bit, but we will say handle change. And that way, whenever we make a change, handle change is going to get triggered, but we actually need to have a function to deal with that. So, I've gone through some of these steps earlier just for the sake of keeping this video tight, because it's going to be covering a lot. But what I've brought over here is a handle change function, and it'll take an event, and that event has a lot of information on it. It's not just the normal browser event, it's a React event, but it's still going to have a lot of the same values. So on event.target, there will be two values that we care about. It's going to be the name and the value. And what we want to do is we want to use those two things to update the value up here. So all I'm doing here is I'm just grabbing the name and the value, and then we want to update this property value. So we will make an updated field. So we need to basically make a copy of the old field. So here we're going to destructure this information here. So this would be fields email, because name will be email. So we're just going to get basically a copy of this object up here that is the value for email. And then we're going to set value. And we could just do this directly. I don't need to do it like this. It gives you a little more flexibility if you need it, but for simplicity, it just could be like that. And so value is going to be whatever the current value of this input is. And then here's where we use our setter. So we can't just set fields. That's data that's managed by React, and it's not intended to be set directly. You need to set it, you need to use the setter that is provided by useState. So here what we're going to do is we're going to set fields, and again we need to essentially make a copy or a new object that we can pass in. So we're going to destructure fields, and then we're going to set the specific field that we're interested in, which is email in this case, to whatever the updated field information is. So that will go ahead and give us basically, email, and its value is going to be an object with a value property, and the value is going to be whatever was typed in here. So let's just give that a whirl. So yeah, we should see now here, you can see when we type, we're actually getting values to show up here. So that's cool. So now our field state's managed through React useState. And then we've got this event in place that's just listening to changes that we make here. So one thing we could do is go ahead and look at what we want to happen when the form is submitted. So we need to, in order to do that, we need to set up a similar event handler. So we would have an onSubmit, and then handle submit would be the event handler for that. And I'm just gonna again copy and paste something in that I had from earlier. So again, we're gonna have an event that comes in, and we want to do some things with that event. One of the most important things to do is to do this event.prevent default, and that's going to keep the submission event from bubbling up and the form actually submitting when we don't necessarily want it to. And I want to track whether or not the form is in the process of being submitted or not, so that we can prevent people from submitting the form over and over. And then here I'm just simulating a submission that's taking a little bit of time. So this might be like an asynchronous API call or something. So I'm just logging out whatever the value of the fields is, and then at the end of this setting is submitting back to false, and just going ahead and putting in like a 2-second delay on that just to simulate that. Now you'll notice it's complaining here about set is submitting. That's because that doesn't exist. So again, we're going to use a hook up here to track this, and we will just say is submitting, and then set is submitting. And we can just initialize that to false, because it shouldn't be submitting out of the gate when the page loads. And the other thing we'll want to do is go down here, and instead of just always disabling the submit button, we can change this to is submitting. So we don't want to allow multiple submissions to happen. And yeah, with that, we should be able to put in some values here and hit submit. And it's going to wait 2 seconds. And notice the button was disabled while it was waiting. And then down here, you can see we have an object, which is our fields. And then we've got email, and the value for email is what we entered. So this is cool. Like, this is kind of the rough thing that you would need if you were going to do something like take all this information and make some kind of API call with it to handle the actual submission. And then we're also tracking whether it's in the process of submitting or not. So, off to a good start. And just for good measure, you may want to do things when this field's blurred. So like if somebody was typing and they click out of it, you may want to do something with running validations potentially, or you may want to do something with marking like whether that field's been touched or not. So just because it's a common thing to handle, I'm going to go ahead and just put in kind of like a dummy function to handle that case. So we'll have handle blur, and again, we don't have that function, so we just need to add it. And for now, I'm just going to put in something just basic in here so we can see if it's blurred or not. So if we click on this and then we click out, you can see down here now it's blurred. So if you wanted to do something in particular when it blurs, that's how you could handle that. And then one thing you're probably noticing is as we do this, there's some information in here that is about the sign-up form, like the fields are definitely related to this particular sign-up form. But a lot of this other stuff isn't. It's just kind of generic form handling and then tracking information on an object here, these fields. So one thing we can do is we could just extract pretty much all of this except for the form and the fields. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to make a separate form handler file here. And then I'm just going to copy and paste all of this kind of out into that file. Give me just a second here. Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna bring over pretty much everything that we had there, and sorry, just cleaning this up here real quick. Okay, so now we've got all this information over in a different file. And what we can do is we can just go ahead and import that here. So we'll do import, and then we want to import, is it form handler? Yeah, form handler from form handler. And then what we can do is we can just basically take all this stuff that we were managing here and import it. So I'm just going to get rid of all that. And what we're going to do is we're going to call form handler with our fields up here. And then it can handle setting up all the stuff that we care about. And we can just grab all these values back from form handler. And with that done, I just want to do the same thing again here and see if it's still working. So I can enter things, and if I hit submit, we got the blurred and we got the value from the submission completing. So that's cool. Like, so at this point, you know, there's some generic stuff you're going to have to do with pretty much any kind of form. And instead of just embedding that in this form and then the next form and the next form, we went ahead and just, you know, pulled that out. And instead we're just passing in what's the relevant information for each of these fields. And we're going to kind of build on that a bit. But that's the general pattern here. So the next thing we'll probably want to do is handle errors. So at the moment, we don't really have a way to do anything about errors that come in. And what we'll want to do is set up some validations that we can have. So like you know, just some crude ones we could do with email address or making sure it's present. And then we could also do something like make sure it has like a specific length. And in order to do that, for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to keep adding information to these fields up above. So I'm going to set up a field property here called validations. And for now, I'm just going to make kind of a crude check that takes a value and just returns whether or not there is a value there. And then I'm going to take a chunk of code here that I've written previously that I'll kind of explain bit by bit. So just a second, apologize for that, the delay. So we're going to need to update handle change because that's where we want to check what's going on. So I'm just going to get rid of that for a second, and I'm going to paste in all this new code down here. And what we want to do is when we get a change, we want to do all the same things we were doing before. We want to get the name and the value off of the field. And then we want to make, what we're going to want to do is make a new version of the fields object because we want to set some things on there. So basically we want to go through each field and we want to look and see if it has any validation errors. And if it does have validation errors, we want to set a new piece of state, which is the form even submittable? Like, should we prevent the form from being submitted? And then we want to update the fields with the new value of the fields, including the errors that we found. And you'll notice too, it's complaining that this set is submittable doesn't exist. So we can just go ahead and do is submittable up here, and set is submittable. And we'll just say initially it's false for now, because we probably want people to enter values before they can do anything. And then we should see that message go away. Yeah. So so essentially when a change comes in, we'll take the existing values, we'll set any errors that we found based on the validations that exist. And then if there are errors, we'll keep the form from being submittable, and then we'll update the fields so that the errors are available within the form. And the way we'll do that is the way we're going to check for validation errors is we're going to take the fields and this is our new copy of the fields. And for every key in field, so like email is right now is the only key, we're going to loop over each of those keys. So here we'll have email, and then we'll look up to see if any error, we'll look up that field, and we'll set an errors property to any errors that we find for that field. And down here, this is where we're finding errors for the field. So here we'll have email. So what we'll do is we'll look at the existing fields, and then we'll look up email, and we'll say, hey, what are the validations for email? So that's what we just set over here. So we're going to have an array. Right now it's just got one thing in it, one validation in it. And then for each of those validations, we're going to run the validation with the value for that field. And then if it is valid, we're just going to return an empty string. And if it's not, we're going to return an error message here. And for now, I've just kind of hard-coded it to be required. So what that's going to do is for every validation in that array, we're going to end up with a value that's either empty string or some error message required in this case. And then we need to just filter out anything that's junk from there that's not real. So we need to filter these out. And in order to do that, we're just going to do this filter here and only return we're basically going to compact the array, only returning things that have text in the string. And there's different ways that this could be done. You could use null or false or something like that, but this is just kind of a straightforward way to do it. And then so if we bubble back up, we'll end up with either an empty array or an array that contains strings of each error message. And then after we've done that, then we'll just return fields here. And remember, this is our copy of the fields. And then that will get set here. So we're taking the current value for fields. I'm sorry, we're taking a copy of the fields. We're updating the value that we're getting from the event changing, and then with that, we're running the validations, and we'll get back an object that has those errors set. And then the next thing we'll want to do is check, is this submittable or not? And if the way that we determine that is whether we have errors for those fields, and if we don't, it is submittable. So let's take a look at has errors. So all that's doing is it's looking at the fields, and then for each field, so email, for example, it's going to check to see if the errors array, what the length is for that. And that's kind of a indication whether there are errors or not. And then it's going to add up for all of the fields. It's going to add up those the error counts. And if those are greater than 0, then it does have errors. So basically, if any field has error messages, that means that we have errors. And if we don't have errors, then it is submittable. But if we do, it isn't submittable. And then with all that information, we can go ahead and do set fields with our updated version of fields. So here, let's just give this a whirl and see what we get. And this should be checking as, oh yeah, there's another change we need to make. We need to actually use this information. So we want to bring is submittable into here. And then we want to use that down here. So we want to say, we want to disable the button if we're submitting or it's not submittable. And then we need to actually, to make this useful, we need to actually use those error messages. So what I'm going to do is where we have that little small markup for errors, I'm just going to replace the content there. And it's good practice to do a key. This helps React remain performant. So for now, I'm just going to do that. So whenever you have a for loop, you need some way to let React know which thing, like what each item in that for loop is, some kind of unique identifier. And you should avoid using something that can change. So like index is a really bad thing to use. So anyway, I'm just using the error text at the moment. And so now if we start playing around with this, we shouldn't see anything going that way, but if we back up, yeah, so as soon as this doesn't have any characters in it, we're going to get that error because our validations ran and we set an errors array on the fields, and the errors are going to include required, and then that's going to cause the errors to be output here because we're just looking to see if there are errors, and if there are any, we're just dumping them out here. And if you're curious too, we could set we could log this out so you can see what this looks like. Let's do that. So now when we type, you can see we have validations and we have errors and there's nothing in there. But as soon as I get rid of that, I apologize, it's outputting stuff on blur, so it kind of causes the output to bounce around here. But you can see now for email, we have errors with an array of one thing, one item, and that item is required. So this is cool. So now we have a way to systematically set errors for any field with validations, and then get back whatever those errors are. And we don't really care what they are from the forms perspective. We just want to show them so that people can fix them. So this is cool. We still have kind of a separation of concerns here where like form handling can be done in a generic way that we can kind of apply to any form. And then I'm just going to remove this log for a second just so we aren't getting so much log noise. And then kind of the obvious next step. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could do with it at this point, but really what you're going to want to do is have reusable validations that, because we're probably going to, for example, if you had password, you would want that to be a required field. And if you have 4 or 5 fields, you may want them all to be required and some to have a minimum length and some to match certain regular expressions or some to have a value within a certain range or whatever. Like the kind of sky's the limit on what validations can be. So a good thing to do is just also separate that out into its own concern and just include whatever the validations are. So I'm just going to show you an example of how you could do that. So here I'm just going to take I'm going to take some code and bring it in here. Give me just a second. Right, so I'm just going to replace all of this. And what I've done is you'll notice we still have our fields here. But now instead of the validations just having inline anonymous functions, we've got these named functions here. So required validation, minimum length validation, which you call with whatever the length is that you want. And then all those are just these little functions up above. And each of them ultimately takes a value and returns a little object. And that object includes whether the validation passed, is it valid? And then if it didn't, whatever the message is that you want to use. And this one's a little bit fancier. What I'm doing here is I'm returning a function based off of the minimum length that you set. And then that function is the validator, but it holds on to whatever minimum length you gave it. So here I'm passing in 4, and then so I'm basically getting back a function that's going to check whatever value it's given, see if the length of that value is greater than 4, And if not, we should give you this error message down here, so it must be at least so-and-so characters. This should probably be greater than or equal to, so let me do that. And then we've kind of changed our API a bit here. So previously the validations just returned true or false, but really in order for them to be useful and to be differentiated, you need to include a message with them. So we need to update some of the error checking that we had. And so we're just going to hop over and look at that here real quick. And it's essentially only affecting this function here. So this is a function that checks the errors for the field. And previously it was just saying, expecting back just a Boolean value, and based on that setting whatever it thought the string should be. But now that we have something that's a little more sophisticated, instead of doing that, what we're going to do is just update this slightly. And what we're going to do here is, sorry, just a second. Take our validation, and for each of those validations, we're going to run them with whatever the current value is for the field, and it's going to give us back that object that we were just looking at. So we need to grab isValid and message, and then we can just return from this map. If it's valid, we'll return the empty string, and if there is a message, we'll return the message. So for that field, we'll end up with an array that includes either empty strings or error messages. And then here we're just filtering out, again, the ones that we don't care about. There's different ways you could do this, but this is just looking for something that denotes kind of a bogus error message. So we should just end up with the ones that have real messages. And then that's the only change that we needed to support setting custom messages for different validations. So now if we go over here, we should, as we type, start seeing these. So must be at least 4 characters. And then as soon as we hit 4, that's going to go away. And as soon as we get rid of it completely, it's going to say it's required and must be at least 4 characters. And you'll notice we can't do anything with submit here. So still can't do anything. And then when we hit 4, it's going to let us submit because we don't have any more errors. Well, looks like I have some other kind of issue going on, but yeah, I mean, that's basically, oh, you know what it is? We're not returning is submittable. Let's just fix that real quick. So it can never be true, essentially, the way it was set up previously. So let's see if we get up to 4, if it'll let us submit. Yeah, there we go. So and now we can submit, and there we go. That's the value from it being submitted, and you can see no errors, 2 validations, and it's got those name validations on there. Now, one last thing. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could do here, but one last thing we could do is just pull these validators out because they don't really have anything to do with this particular form. Like, we would want to reuse them across forms. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull those out of here, and we'll just make another file that's called validators. And in that file, we're just going to put these 2 functions, but we need to export them, not export. And cool. And with that, we've now got these validators out in a separate file, and then over here we can just do our import. We can say import. We have 2 of them, so we're gonna do required validation and minimum length validation, and we need to give it the file that we're importing from, and that's going to be validators. I guess that should be validations. Let's do that just to keep it consistent. I'll rename that validations, and then this is cleaned up, and then at this point we should be able to do the same thing. So as I type, Those errors are going to go away. I can hit submit. And there we go. So, yeah, I mean, just to review here, at the end of this, what we have is a form that sets up all the normal kind of handlers a form would have and is able to manage state, or is able to get the state that's, you know, relevant, and then is able to output errors, but isn't directly implementing all of the handling for that in the form. And if we wanted to add additional fields up here, it's pretty flexible and we would be able to do that. Really the whole thing here is more or less driven by whatever fields are defined here. And if we needed to add additional information about the fields, that would be pretty straightforward to do. We could do things like keep track of whether the field's been touched or not, because sometimes you want to make sure you don't show an error message until somebody's actually like done something with the field. But that's all pretty straightforward stuff to do at this point. And you would just keep adding whatever properties you wanted to or whatever fields you wanted to. And maybe just to show you, well, I guess just to continue on that, you know, our validations are separate. We could keep adding more validations in here. It's really easy to add validations, and also if we wanted to have like custom messages, it'd be relatively easy to do. We could just pass in messages, or, you know, whatever we wanted to pass in advance. So like kind of how we're passing in for here. If we wanted to pass in a custom message, we could also do that, and like override whatever the default message is. And then again, the form handling stuff's all pretty separate here, and really, other than changing like where you would want to submit to, I don't know if there's much else you would want to change on this side. So yeah, it's just basically all kind of cleaned up and isolated into one place and could be reused across multiple forms. So just to show you too quickly that you can just throw in another field here pretty easily, I'm gonna take this form group here, and let's just do a field for like full name or something like that. So we'll just call it name, just to keep it simple. So name, and we'll just say name. And there is something here that's worth noting. The name value that comes back off of the event is whatever this name is. So you want to make sure you have that set to the same thing that you're using in that fields object above. Here I'm just going to say text and say name help. And here we're going to want to set up a name field. And for the placeholder, we'll say full name. And this is going to be name help. And then here we'll just say your full name. Name errors. Fields dot name errors. And we'll just basically just want to update all these to be name. And then from there we should be good. So up above, we need to actually set up a name field. And we'll call that name. And now we have a name field. Now it's rendering again. Sorry about that. And we could just leave the exact same validations on there if we wanted to. But just to show you they're different, maybe I'll set this to like 2. So here we'll start typing, and it's gonna say, yeah, it must be at least 2 characters. And then as soon as we hit 2, it's gonna be gone. And if we back out and we don't have anything, it's gonna give us 2 errors, one saying it's required, one saying it must be at least 2 characters. So yeah, you can see how doing a little bit of legwork up front and separating out these concerns makes it easy to just go in and be able to handle different kinds of different amounts of fields, adding additional fields, adding additional forms. Like we could really easily set up a login form, for example, and reuse all the same stuff that we just made. and then again, build out additional validators or validations if you want to do that. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I don't know if this is what I would use in production for handling forms, but I just wanted to use this as an example to illustrate what you can do with React and handling state and kind of separating out some of your concerns to make things a little more flexible. So yep, hope that was helpful. If it was, please hit the subscribe button to get more videos like this. Hit the bell icon to be notified when videos come out. If you liked the video, hit like. If you hated it, give me a thumbs down. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.